Hey everybody, welcome to the session on virtual armed robbery. Hopefully you didn't bring any money with you today, or you might be losing it. Really glad to see so many people here. I'm David DiBernardi. I'm the Director of Finance with the JPIA. I am one of your moderators here. I also, as part of my job, oversee IT, so you could say I'm an interested party here for sure. With me, moderating as well, is our risk control manager from the JPIA, Robin Flint, and I'll turn it over to her in a minute. And I really appreciate her time. She's experienced at this now after doing the board meeting yesterday, so she's seasoned. So hey, have you know, wasn't that long ago, at least for me, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, wasn't that long ago, cybersecurity was a foreign term to me. Seemed like 10 years ago or thereabouts. If you asked me what cybersecurity was, I would have, I don't know, something what the government does to launch attacks on North Korea. I don't know, something of that sort. I didn't think it was so personal, but obviously these days it's becoming more and more personal. This session will be great because we're going to talk about what is cybersecurity. We're going to talk about how it affects so many places worldwide, different countries and so forth, how pervasive it is. We're going to talk about what it's like for a company to be hit and the many things they have to go through. And then we're also going to bring it down to the water district level, where we're going to have a speaker from the water district, Mark Madison, which I'll introduce him later, talk to you about the specific threats at water districts. We'll wrap that up with a quick recap of what's covered in our program for cybersecurity, because after all, if you listen to all this, you're going to be kind of wondering, boy, I hope I have some coverage. Well, you'll learn about that, and I'll have Karen Thiesing update all of you at the end on that. The process here is going to be, I'm going to introduce one speaker at a time, and then we'll take questions. And then we'll do that process again. We'll introduce another speaker and we'll take questions. You're welcome to type questions throughout the process. Robin and I will be looking at those questions, and we'll do our best to make sure that they're asked of our speakers. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Robin to go over protocol with everybody. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. It was interesting. I was driving in today and they said it was Charity Tuesday, and they were talking about all the be wary of the virtual charities because thieves are out more today than, well, probably every day. But this is an interesting session, and I thought it connected well as I was driving in. As David mentioned, I'm Robin Flint, Risk Control Manager here at the JPIA. I'm just going to go over a few technical guidelines regarding Zoom. I am your Zoom virtual moderator. You're going to hear the speakers, presenters just ask me to advance the slides for them, but I will also be monitoring the chat questions. So everyone is on mute so that we can just reduce the noise and distractions for the background. And we will then share with you how we'd like you to proceed if you have any questions of the speakers. So we're going to ask that you use the chat features. Those that joined us on our board of directors meeting yesterday, you are experienced at this. If you have Zoom technical questions, feel free to type that in. Myself and some other JPI staff members will try our best to be able to help you. And again, as David mentioned, questions of the speakers, he's going to be fielding in between each of the speakers, and if we have time at the end. So how do you use chat? Now, we've learned on Zoom different types of connections to be able to find the chat features are maybe a little different. If you're on your desktop or laptop computer, look over at your Zoom taskbar and look for the chat button or icon. You want to click on that, please. Once that pops open, it used to default to everyone, but now it does not. So what we're going to ask you to do is open up that icon and look for the three dots. And if you could see my mouse here, you'll note those three dots. Go ahead and click on those three dots because that's going to bring you a drop-down menu. And we're just going to ask that you send your chat question to everyone. This way, David and I are going to be able to field those questions of the speakers, or if you have Zoom-related questions, we're going to be able to see those. So do look for that drop-down arrow and do click on everyone, and we ask that you type your message in, and once done, do hit enter to send your message. If you're on a smartphone or a tablet, you may find your chat icon under the More button. So it's the three dots and then More. Click on that. You should see chat. Again, click on chat. It should pop up. If necessary, once you're in chat, to ensure that it goes to everyone, click those three dots, use that drop down arrow, select everyone, type in your message, and then hit enter. If you're call in only, so if you're only by telephone and you're listening to this, not viewing it on Zoom, but in listen only mode, if you have a question, we're going to ask that you raise your hand. This way your name or your number actually pops up to the top. And that way we can field your question. It's *9 to raise your hand. When we're at that appropriate point, David D. Bernardi will then call on your number to confirm who we are or who you are to ask your question. And please remember to use *6 to mute and unmute your lines. I think we only have one telephone only user. Most folks are viewing by Zoom, either on their computer or phone audio. But if you're viewing, please use the chat feature. And if you have any technical questions outside of that, give us a call here at JPIA, 1-800-231-5742. Again, 1-800-231-5742 if you have any technical questions related to Zoom. And I appreciate it. I see a lot of chats that are coming in. All right, David DiBernardi, I'm going to pass this over to you.
All right. Hey, Robin, it appears, at least I'm getting reports that not everybody has the ability to select all in the chat function. It looks like only you or me privately are they able to select.
Everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you click on the three dots, do you come up with a pull down that says chat with everyone publicly or everyone publicly and directly?
No, Robin, there's not an option there. It's only to you or David.
Okay.
Just the two hosts.
Well, how about, I think that's how we set up Zoom. My apologies for that. So go ahead.
I get everyone. This is Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
I get everyone, Robin Flint and David DiBernardi are my three choices.
Looks like it's working. We're getting chat messages now. So
okay,
yeah,
perfect.
It's working now.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that.
Someone updated it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks,
David
Patricia.
DiBernardi, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Robin.
You're welcome.
So as I introduce our first speaker, one key point I forgot to mention earlier is one thing that's great about all our speakers we have here this morning is that they speak English. And they're going to put things to you in straight English. And I know I can really appreciate that. I'm sure all of you appreciate that. So without further ado, our first speaker is David Trepp. He's a partner, IT assurance, technology entrepreneur since 1989. David has led over 1,400 information security penetration test engagements for satisfied customers across all major industries throughout the United States and abroad. He's given dozens of presentations to audiences nationwide on a variety of information security topics. David, a U.S. Army veteran, is founder and CEO of Info at Risk, now BPM, a leading comprehensive penetration test firm. David has worked in information security with utilities, bank, law enforcement, government, healthcare, commercial organizations since 1998. When not at work, David exercises his risk management skills as an avid rock climber and long distance cyclist. So please welcome David.
Okay, thank you, David. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to start off this morning for our virtual armed robbery examination with a quick outline of the cybersecurity threat landscape. So what I want to accomplish with my introductory presentation is to just kind of set the table for who's out there to get us, why they want to do that, what they're hoping to achieve, and a little bit about what their means of attacking us are to perform this armed robbery. So without further ado, Robin, we'll go to the next slide. Just a little bit about our perspective. Thanks for that introduction, David. Again, we do penetration testing. So essentially, we break into organizations for a living. We're called white hat hackers, which is to say we act like the bad guys, but we're the good guys. So We're not really experts at planning, building, or managing security controls, but we are experts at defeating them. And as David said, we do a lot of work for utilities, so we have quite a bit of experience at attacking industrial control and SCADA systems across a wide array of applications. And so today I'm going to bring a hacker's perspective to the threat landscape. So next slide, please. Again, today is the threat landscape. So if we can move forward, Robin. Next slide, our threat sources. So really, if we look at who's out there to get us, we can, at sort of the most macroscopic level, boil it up to these 4 populations that you see in the left-hand column there. So hacktivists are hackers or groups of hackers who have some kind of moral or ethical or political bone to pick with the folks they're targeting, and they take it out on them with cyber attacks. The next group there, foreign nation state sponsored entities. This is an area of great concern for utilities, as foreign nation state sponsored entities have indeed targeted the critical infrastructure of our nation, just like we are doing to other nations' infrastructures. And there's lots of very, very clandestine ways that those nation-state entities seek to attack us. Then there is probably the largest population of cybersecurity threats, and those are the criminal profiteers. So those are the folks out there to monetize those attacks. So when we read about ransomware attacks in the headlines, extorting money out of hospitals and governments and utilities and so forth, those are profiteers just seeking to make a buck. And then lastly, there is that insider population, so a much smaller population, but a decidedly non-zero population of employees, vendors, contractors, etc., whether they are malicious in intent or merely poorly trained or negligent, they constitute a distinct threat source. So again, at the highest level, those are really the 4 threat sources that we have. So just a couple quick examples of those threat sources, starting with the next slide. Nation-state sponsored entities. Here we've just grabbed a couple of headlines outlining North Korean, Russian, and Chinese attacks. For those of you who are not particularly technical, by the way, Bloomberg Technology is a great resource for not particularly technical, but timely and reasonably accurate summaries of attacks. And there we can see some examples of North Korean hijacking computers to mine bitcoins. Some folks estimate that North Korea's single largest cash inflow is from cybercrime activities, including Bitcoin mining and ransomware. And then, of course, Russian hackers attacking the power grid and aviation, Chinese hackers attacking firms linked to disputes in the South China Sea, and so forth. There are just examples that go on and on and on. And as a person who's worked firsthand with various voting agencies, I can tell you that attacks on our voting system are real. Next slide, please. Criminal profiteer examples. This slide is in here showing what we see here are the first 20-odd lines of code from a piece of software that's used to, in this case, attack wireless mice. And we'll show an example of a tool doing that in a moment. But the reason that this slide is here for us today is really to point out that hackers don't have to be sort of ninja-level cyber experts. One can go out and just find information like this source code right here in the public domain for free. And you don't have to be an expert at all to grab this ready-to-wear software and put it to some malicious use. And on to the next slide.
David?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not seeing the slides at all.
Not seeing the slides? Can everybody else see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Must be a setting you have, Jerry.
Yes.
Okay,
I see
go
that.
ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, Jerry. I'll try to do my best to be descriptive of the slides.
If I'm the only one, I'll live with it.
So on this slide, what we see here are a couple examples of cyber criminals and cyber tools for hire. So these screenshots were actually taken from what's known as the dark web. We strongly caution you away from visiting the dark web on your computer. You definitely should not do it on a Windows computer, no matter what you do. If one goes to the dark web, which is an encrypted, anonymized little corner of the interweb, one can perform all kinds of, find all kinds of tools to perform criminal activities. Here we see on the right just a price list for various tools that one can go out and buy or rent. On the left here, we're having a little negotiation with a seller of a denial of service attack, and you can see we've outlined some things there like free tests for serious customers and discounts for returning customers and refunds if you don't use all of the tools that you're buying from us or all the time that you've purchased. These are normal merchant to customer type conversations, just like you might have with a vendor supplying your agency with a product or service. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we've got the malicious and or negligent employees. One of the most famous examples there is a headline from years ago. In San Francisco, a network or IT person was fired under some less than friendly conditions, decided to lock up the entire computer system and not reveal the passcodes to anybody, and eventually ended up in jail as a result. And then on the center on the left there, we see a drawer. This is a drawer from a desk in a lobby of an organization that has a little sticky note in there with a passcode on it. And on the right, we see an example of people storing their passwords in spreadsheets, which is a very common technique. We recommend you use a password safe type application. But if you're going to use a spreadsheet or a Word document to save your passwords, put a password on that Excel spreadsheet so that people can't just open it routinely. So those are sort of examples of malicious and or negligent employee-based attacks. Next slide. The worsening threat landscape. Suffice it to say, with the attack toolkits that are out there right now, attackers have the upper hand. These formerly secret hackers tools that have been released into the public from the Equation Group, which is a group widely believed to have been sponsored by the National Security Administration, the NSA. One of their engineers took home some super secret information, hackers tools to help practice for a security exam. Come to find out their home computer had been compromised, and all of those hacker tools were stolen and then have been leaked into the public domain over time and sold. And then there's all these other bullets here of all the things that you can see that are causing the worsening threat landscape that we're faced with, and that's why we see so many headlines about recent ransomware attacks and denial of service systems down and stolen PII, the personally identifiable information, and so forth. And of course, the coronavirus has its own special thing. As Robin pointed out this morning, today is Giving Day, and hackers like to take advantage of that. If we move to the next slide, we'll see that the idle hands caused by the school being let out and layoffs and so forth. We can see a number of headlines there of hacks that have occurred this year, largely because of people with too much time on their hands, or as my mom always said, idle hands do the devil's work. And of course, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a chemist by training. And so, of course, all us chemists have been playing with our chemistry sets during the COVID shutdown. So that's really who's out there to get us. If we move on to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about how these threat populations really perpetrate their attacks. So we're going to start with human attacks, also known as social engineering attacks, the most common form of attack because, of course, it's the easiest, and then physical attacks, which we shouldn't overlook, and technical attacks, which we're not going to get into a lot of detail this morning because we're not going to have a real technical presentation here. But these attack techniques are performed both standalone and combined with each other. So if we move forward, we're going to start by talking about human attacks. But before we begin, I want to do just one quick piece of training on information security concepts, and that is the concept of risk assessment. So what you see in the middle of the slide here in red is what is essentially the simplest possible formula for risk, where risk is calculated as a combination of likelihood and impact. So when it comes to information security, likelihood is influenced by things like how easy is it for an attacker to identify that a vulnerability exists? And then subsequent to identifying that vulnerability, how easy is it then for the attacker to exploit or take advantage of that vulnerability? So those things are going to influence likelihood, and then impact is brought into the picture here. So a low impact would be maybe a minor disruption of services or a little embarrassing, defacement of a web page. A high impact would be a serious interruption of services, the disclosure of sensitive information, whether that's employee information or your customer information or member information, an impact that actually has some kind of negative influence on industrial control or SCADA systems. Those would be high impact. So likelihood and impact really frame the risk sort of landscape that we face. And so let's move forward to the next slide and let's talk about this formula as it relates to social engineering or human attacks. And so the first thing is that social engineering attacks are very likely to be successful. And the reason they're likely to be successful is we, as modern human beings who live in complex societies, have an innate assumption of truth. When we perform interactions with other human beings, we assume truth. And indeed, civilizations couldn't grow without this innate assumption of truth. We have to believe that when we negotiate something with someone else, that by and large, they're negotiating in good faith. Additionally, humans are very susceptible to being lied to because we're stuck with the human psyche that we have. There are no published update schedule for human beings. And social engineers in the third bullet there rely heavily on taking advantage of some kind of, or creating some kind of unusual situation. And what many, many studies have shown is that human cognitive abilities take a drastic nosedive when humans are presented with unusual circumstances. So hackers try to do that. And then lastly, statistics are not very clear on this because it's hard to get accurate statistics, but the statistics that we have suggest that the average employee fails a social engineering attack 4 times before they are finally inoculated from these kinds of attacks. So suffice it to say, the little comic strip you see on the left-hand side there is super true. We spend more of our time cracking human beings than we do cracking computers. We use human beings to let us in, and then we go hacking the computers. And so that's why social engineering attacks are so likely to succeed. And if we jump to the next slide, we'll see why they're so high impact. When we have computer systems, we have all kinds of security controls, from physical controls to technical controls, protecting those sensitive data stores that we're trying to silo off. But the fact of the matter is, one person with a set of credentials that has appropriate privileges can circumvent or just cut straight through all of those controls and safeguards and get right to those sensitive data stores. So if we think about our formula again, risk equals likelihood times impact. Social engineering attacks are so high risk because they are likely to succeed, and they can have tremendous impact. So that's kind of our setup for social engineering attacks. A couple of examples of social engineering attacks. If we move to the next slide, here we see a typical modern phishing attack. In this case, it's a spear phish, by which we mean a targeted phishing attack. In this case, we've taken an example from a little bank. What you see in the top there, the top box is we've sent an email from abcbank.com. And of course, the names have been redacted to protect the innocent. But in this case, we're just pretending to be the bank. We've taken a little technical attack so that we can spoof the email to make it look like it came from within the bank when actually it came from our email server. We use a topical subject matter. In this case, we used a little information gathering to determine that there's a telephone system change that's going to happen at the bank, and so we're going to coattail off that. We're going to put a little link or URL in the email asking people to click on it to take a quick survey. That's all we're asking for. You know, we're not asking to try to smuggle a coffee can full of Krugerrands out of some foreign nation. We're just asking them to take a survey, completely harmless. And then lastly, we're going to throw in a Starbucks gift card for the first N number of people who submit the survey, because of course, who doesn't want a free cup of coffee? And so this is a very difficult email to identify as an attack. And this is what a modern spear phishing email looks like. Next slide, please. Common phone script. So email is not the only type of social engineering attack. Phone and text attacks are also very common. And here we see some attacks both against your customers or members, as well as against the employees of your agencies and districts. So some tried and true ones that you've probably heard on your answering machines coming home at the end of the day are, you know, impersonating Microsoft tech support, and your computer has a problem, has a virus, or impersonating the IRS, and there's going to be, you know, some action taken against you if you don't call right back. You know, those are sort of the tried and true ones. And then there's some newer sort of 21st century versions of those, like impersonating a rep from the water district, maybe even using a caller ID that looks like it came from locally that says, hey, you know, you've used your credit card to pay a bill in the past, and now we've had a security event, and I need to talk to you about what happened, and I'm going to actually try to harvest information from you. Or maybe somebody has placed a complaint with Google Reviews or Yelp, and we're going to call them, and we're going to impersonate the water district again, and we're going to say, hey, we saw that negative review. You know, I'm in customer service, and I just want to let you know that we take that really seriously, and if you'll just divulge a little personally identifiable information to me, I'm going to go ahead and get you a gift card for your trouble, and so forth. And then on to attacks against employees, vendor tech support, human resources are a very common target these days, with resumes that have been loaded or armed with malicious payloads embedded in them. Accounting departments are under increased level of attack for payables fraud and urgent payment or expenses. Attackers are even using artificial intelligence-aided deep fakes of executives' voices, where they've taken recordings of someone like me giving a presentation, and they've used artificial intelligence to put together a statement that calls the administrative exec and says, hey, I need this done right away, to gain that sense of urgency. And then, of course, very tried and true attacks against customer service or help desk, impersonating clients or members. So those are common phone scripts. And then here, next slide here, we'll see a couple of text attacks. So some of them are just emergency, like we see on the left there, a text attack where someone says, you know, one of your loved ones has been involved in a car accident and I can help, but I need your credit card number. Another one, you know, on the right there, totally routine. This is FedEx with some tracking number. We need you to click on this link where we're going to attack your browser. Or again, customer service where we see a negative ad, a very common text type attack. And then next slide, a couple of examples of these during a pandemic. Here we see an email supposedly from the CDC, and there's a text in the top right there from somebody who's going to get their stimulus money, and then in the bottom there, another email with a malicious link in it that someone wants you to click on. Moving to the next slide, a couple more examples. The one in the top left here we think is really quite funny. This one on the top left actually was just received recently by one of our employees, made it through our mail filters because there was nothing malicious in it, no links, no embedded malware or anything, but it's a message that says, "I've hacked your Zoom account, and I have had control of your webcam for the last couple months, and you don't want anybody to see some of the images I have recorded. So if you don't want me to reveal those images into the public domain, why don't you go ahead and send me a couple of Bitcoin, and we'll take care of this just amongst ourselves." In this case, we don't even use Zoom, so it wasn't real. But suffice it to say, interesting COVID-related attack. And then screening forms, which again have malicious payloads embedded. This was also an attack against our organization that we found in the mail filters that we thought was pretty interesting. And then the last common form of social engineering in the next slide is that an engineer just shows up at the door, in this case, one of our engineers or a real attacker. So some kind of pretext for an on-site visit. So David has responsibilities, some IT responsibilities for JPIA, so we may show up there with a little clipboard and a little mock work order from David dispatching us to check the sprinkler heads or the UPSs in the server closets or malware on people's workstations, whatever, some script, and we're going to try to walk in, get past reception, and get into places where we don't belong. And so we may have fake lanyards, fake work orders, little made-up shirts with made-up company name logos on them, all to try to convey a sense of belonging, which we're then going to parlay into some further attacks on site. And so if we look at a couple of those examples, the next slide here, a couple of physical attack tools. So we may try to talk our way in. We may just try to break in, depending on the situation. There in the top left, we see a couple of what we call pocket attack tools, things that'll just fit in our pocket, little pieces of wire, little shim tools, little universal keys that fit all kinds of locks. Here on the lower left, we see some specific tools that we've built for defeating various types of door locks. In the lower left there, we see double doors with a flip knob on the inside. We've got a little piece of antenna wire with a little hook on the end and a little piece of cable inside it where we can just twist it and it'll turn the twist knob. There in the lower center there, we see doors that are built for the to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act that have handles where we go underneath the door and grab the handle and pull it down. There on the right, we see one of our clipboards opened up. So we show up on site with a clipboard, and it's got a little fake work order from David on it. Underneath it, it's got attack tools. So if you've got RFID badges, we've got a little tool that will steal the information from your badge and then clone our simulated badge. We've got little wireless mouse injectors. So we've got a little computer in here to inject keystrokes into your wireless keyboards and mice, and that uses that code that we showed a couple minutes ago that's free and available in the public domain. We've got a little rogue host. We've got a little fake non-domain joined computer that's meant to impersonate a valid computer on your network. If we can find a place to plug it in, or we can get onto your wireless network, then we're going to deploy an attack computer on your network. And these are very, very commonplace attack tools. And then next slide, once an attacker... Yes, go ahead.
Hey, David, there's a question, one question we have about Zoom. Are there any security issues with Zoom that people should be aware of? Or?
Yeah, there are a couple issues with Zoom that people should be aware of. First and foremost, that's a great question, by the way, and this is true of most platforms, most video conferencing platforms. When it comes to Zoom, in particular, there are a couple that we'll kind of skip over. We'll just go to the general ones. First and foremost is the way we send meeting invitations. Most people send meeting invitations via email. Email is an insecure means of communication. And so this meeting had a password on it. And thank you for that, David. Big thumbs up for having a password on this meeting. But the meeting information was distributed via email. So that email is sitting in everybody's boxes, probably in clear text, because there was no end-to-end email encryption routine used to send it, which means that if any of us have been compromised, then that meeting information is available to attackers. So there's a very in the hacking world, a very well-known case where one of those hacktivist groups known as Anonymous joined in a conference between the FBI Cybercrime Division and Scotland Yard Cybercrime Division and recorded the whole thing and then published it in the public domain. Why? Because they had cracked the email of one of the attendees and allowed them into the meeting. That's the biggest issue. There are also issues about how these tools store and secure the passwords. As it turns out, many of them store passwords in a very unsecure fashion, and it's not too difficult for us to get our hands on that just by attacking the Zoom application and a couple of other things. But by and large, the biggest risk is how you invite everybody to the meeting. And if you want to keep people out of the meeting, you need to use passwords and you need to distribute the meeting information securely. Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
Anything else in chat that we want to address, David?
Not at the moment.
Okay, great. So after an attacker has found their way onto your premises, what might they do? So there's all kinds of old school, tried and true ways, grab screenshots off of computers, grab paperwork, see if we can find those passwords on sticky notes, that sort of thing. And then there's the high-tech way of capturing information. So again, that rogue host, we'll see an example of that in the next slide. Commandeer an unlocked workstation. Just deploy a keystroke logger that just captures all of your keystrokes. Use USB keys to just plug it into a USB port and slurp everything that's on the drive there. Or the USB key we see in our little picture here, this is a USB key that's been designed to appear to the computer to be a keyboard. So when we plug that USB key in, the computer thinks a keyboard has been plugged in, and then it thinks the world's fastest typist is now typing in it, because we've got a couple thousand lines of instructions coded into it that we're going to tell the computer to open up a little communications channel back to our command and control center, all from a USB key the computer thinks is a keyboard. Deploy malware by dropping media, such as CDs or USB keys with nice enticing labels like, the layoff list or changes to compensation. And then our favorite attack technique when we're on site is to deploy malware and or backdoor communications channels. So backdoor communications channels are ways for us to get in, deploy something, and get out, and then continue our hack. So covert channels out to the internet. I won't go through the technical details. Deploy a Wi-Fi access point. They're super cheap and inexpensive and easy to do. Traditional old-fashioned landline modem, modulator, demodulator, or better yet, a nice new 4G or 5G modem. They're a little more expensive, but for a high-value target, worth the investment for an attacker to leave behind. And through those backdoor communications channels, then we can persist and escalate to our heart's content. So we move to the next slide here, and we'll wrap up and move on to the next presenter. Here's an example of deploying a rogue host. So what we have here on the left is we have a multifunction printer device that's been plugged into the network, that we've just taken that network cord and we've just plugged a little rogue host in there. We social engineered or physically broke in, and then we plugged that little rogue host in there. We're going to stuff it out of the way. It's got a little Wi-Fi adapter in it. And so what we see on the right there, we flipped up the papers on our clipboard now, and we've got a little screen cut out of our clipboard there. And now we're out in the parking lot using Wi-Fi to direct our little attack host to start performing attacks against the system. And then our last example slide here, moving to the final slide, just a real quick sort of a peek behind the curtain at how attackers defeat passwords. So this is a very simple example here of a technical attack. What we see in Roman numeral 1 is just a login portal. In this case, it's a human resource application. This was for a large law enforcement agency. Your agency might be a little smaller, but suffice it to say, it doesn't really matter how big or small you are. What we're going to do is we're going to find your login portals. And then in Roman numerals 2 and 3, we're going to set up a little piece of software on our computer so that we can see all the traffic moving back and forth between our web browser and your web server that's serving up this application portal. And then in Roman numeral 4, and so we're going to identify all the appropriate fields because we can see where they are. Fields like username field, password field. And then in Roman numeral 4, we're going to take a census database conveniently provided by the U.S. Census Bureau in the public domain, and we're going to take the first 50,000 most common surnames in the United States, and we're going to modify the database to reflect your naming convention. So if you have first initial, last name, or first name, first initial of your last name, whatever, we will have figured that out already through social engineering. And we're going to modify the database. In this case, we come out with 35,000 names. And then in Roman numeral 5, we're going to try to log in to this application 35,000 times. Every time we log in, we're going to use a different username. That way, we don't trigger any account lockouts. And we're going to take our time. We're not going to do it all in a couple seconds, so we don't trigger any what called rate limiting lockouts. We're going to just take our time, and over the course of a couple days, we're going to attempt 35,000 logins, each one with a different username, and then one lousy password. So when I say lousy password, I mean some variation on the word password. I mean some variation on your water district's name, right? When we attack ACWA, JPIA, we're going to include JPIA in our dictionaries and all kinds of variations on that because people love to use that in their password. We're going to use the season and the year, so fall 2020 and variations on that. We're going to pick one crappy password and we're going to try 35,000 times to log in. And it doesn't matter if 34,990 of those names aren't even valid names on your network. We don't care. We're just looking for the 10 who are. And out of the 10 who are, we're just looking for the one who's using that weak password. And if none of them are, that's okay. We'll just pick another crappy password tomorrow, and we'll start with another 35,000 guesses until we find that combination of a valid username who's using a weak, easy-to-guess password, and then voila, we're in. In this example here in Roman numeral 7, this was a large organization. We actually had 4 hits our very first time through and started logging in and getting into law enforcement officers' personnel records. And so that's sort of just a quick peek behind the curtain at how easy it is for attackers to perform technical attacks. And again, this is not a very sophisticated example, but more sophisticated ones aren't necessarily that much harder. So that's it. That is a hacker's view of the threat landscape. For our conclusion slide here, one more slide, Robin. Obviously, information security is a balance between necessary access and secure restrictions. Cybersecurity threat landscape is worsening, and the threat sources include those 4 populations we illustrated: hacktivists, cyber criminals, nation-state-sponsored entities, and insiders. And those hackers employ a combination of human, physical, and technology-based attacks. All right, so that's it for our intro to the threat landscape. Other questions at this time? I'm sorry, I haven't been tracking on chat.
Yeah, so David, there are a couple follow-up questions from the earlier question. One is, can you attend a Zoom meeting anonymously?
Yes, I believe it's possible to attend a Zoom meeting anonymously. Yeah, there are a couple ways to do that. The easiest way is what you see here. I'm calling in as a phone user because whoever it was discussing the Dell laptop with the microphone. I'm speaking to you from a Dell laptop, and it has microphone issues, so I'm using my telephone headset. But that obviously the Zoom doesn't recognize me, even though I put in my my access code as if I were David Trepp. And there are some more technical ways to defeat Zoom's, let's call it lack of intelligence about who's attending.
Okay, and then another question related to that is, so how do you distribute meeting invitations securely?
Yeah, great question. Unfortunately, security and convenience are often diametrically opposed. So the way we do it is we have a little document handling server, and what we do is we send out an invitation to people using Outlook, just like you normally would, but then that invitation says you need to go to our site and you need to download the meeting information. And of course, in order to get to our site, you need to have a username and password. And as you might imagine, in our case, that password is a sentence long. And then you go grab the meeting information in a document that's been secured there. There are plenty of tools out there. We have our own custom built because, of course, we're securing things like criminal justice data. But you can use Drop or Dropbox or any of those types of third-party tools out there that are free or inexpensive, and put the meeting information on a document there, and then make people log in to go grab it. I'm sorry, I know that's not convenient. I wish I had a better answer. No.
All right, so another question. What do you do if you accidentally click on one of the phishing emails?
Yeah, first thing you should do is tell IT right away. The second thing you should do is unplug your network cable or turn off your Wi-Fi so that the payload that you may have just allowed onto your system does not have any further opportunity to propagate across the company network. First of all, tell IT, right? You know, the thing about social engineering is we're all susceptible to it. Even security experts are susceptible to social engineering attacks. And we are not failures as human beings just because we fell for a social engineering attack, and need to be ready to admit it, to tell IT right away so that they can take remedial action and mitigate impact. And that, again, is true for unplugging your network cable or turning off your Wi-Fi. So again, to mitigate the impact, the likelihood has already been realized in that case. Now it's time to work on impact.
David, there's been a couple of requests about whether we would be able to make the slides available after the meeting to others. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I've provided Robin with a PDF of this slide deck, so you can't actually look at it as a PowerPoint because I'm afraid of metadata lurking in the slides because those are actual images from hacks. But as a PDF, it's safe to pass around. So Robin, feel free to distribute. All
right. I'm gonna stop on the questions for now. We'll get back to them today, but I'd like to move on to the next speaker. So don't think that I'm ignoring your question. I still see some questions there. Well, I'll try to get to them, but I want to make sure we give time to all our speakers. So if you could bear with me. So our next speaker is Scott Howard. Scott Howard is a project management professional, certified Cisco network associate, and certified HIPAA security professional over the last 35 years. Scott Howard has done stints working the U.S. Navy, PG&E, Franklin Templeton, in technology and process automation. In 2001, Scott founded Shandam Consulting, a pure consulting firm that aims to help its clients secure, stabilize, and optimize their information technology environments. In this role, Scott has worked with organizations impacted by ransomware attacks and other issues, but he greatly prefers, I think there's a strong emphasis there, by the way, greatly prefers prefers helping organizations avoid this situation by designing and deploying information technology best practices. So please welcome Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. As he mentioned, we work with a lot of higher education, state agencies. In fact, the Secretary of State is a client of ours. We've got them through 2 election cycles without any attacks. We prefer to work on the prevention side as opposed to the actual vulnerability assessment side. We have been involved with a couple ransomware attacks, and I want to talk about it a less technical view, but more of a personal view of how those ransomware attack, how it impacts the company and what are the effects from that. So Rob, if you move to the next slide. So just for fun, I Googled ransomware, Sacramento ransomware, because we're based out of Sacramento. You can look at the skyline behind me. And these are just a couple high profile attacks I see pop up. Sacramento Bee, Regional Transit, the Cache Creek Casino had a 3-week closure from the cyber attack. I can only assume they didn't want to pay the ransom. 3 weeks for a casino has to be a brutal amount of money. So, and for every one of these reported attacks, there's probably many more unreported attacks. So I don't know these company stories, but I know one story. I'm going to share that today. Next slide. So I got a call at 5 p.m. on a Friday evening. It was a family gathering. There's a Schedule III pharmaceutical manufacturer that one of our employees had worked with them in a previous life. A virus had encrypted all their systems. They were offline. Many of their key staff were on vacation. They had little IT capacity, capability, or resources. They were out of business. Everything was shut down. And from a business standpoint, this was really difficult because all the things you would engage into with a vendor, like contracts, NDAs, purchase orders, those were also encrypted as well. So just setting up a business relationship to help them was very challenging. So we had to kind of redirect resources from planned, projects were planned months in advance to go help these folks. And that itself was a challenge because, to be blunt, little inside baseball, all the super talented, hardworking folks are booked months in advance. So what we get are the people that are a little more junior and sitting on the bench. That's the reality of who you can apply to this. Because most companies can't respond with their own staff. They don't have the resources to do this. Next slide. Going backwards, we figured out what had actually happened. It was a virus originated a Microsoft Word attachment sent from outside the organization. The virus spread by exploiting known vulnerabilities. These were old, unupdated Windows systems. Everything was encrypted, and the hackers wanted a 6-figure Bitcoin ransom. We don't actually know the number. That was not shared with us, but we know that's what it was large. Everything was encrypted, including their local data backup files. They couldn't get their data back because it was all encrypted now. Locations from multiple states were affected, and there was almost no system documentation. Next slide. A little overview. I'm not going to get into this. This is somebody else's slide of how this particular malware infection worked. What you should know, though, that these are modular. These, as David touched on, these are put together from various different hacking groups. There's one for the payload, one for the encryption, one for the ransomware. And they're also all built on, increasingly, our taxpayer-funded tools. These were started out as NSA tools that were repurposed for criminal intent, so your tax dollars at work. It's also very sophisticated. These are not pimply-faced teenagers in the basement. These are information professionals, the best of the best, making these tools now being sold on the open market. It's difficult for almost any organization to withstand a concerted attack at this level. It's also kind of gets this modular. It's almost like an evil Build-A-Bear workshop, right? The hackers can customize this for whatever their target is. Next slide. So you're encrypted. You're locked out. What do? You pay the ransom or not? You have 2 choices. So if you pay the ransom and get your data back, it's expensive. The cost is tied to the size of the environment. We speculate that the Cache Creek didn't pay the ransom because of their size of the environment. It's probably in the multiple millions of dollars. It's illegally risky. Paying ransom may violate federal anti-terrorist laws. There's actually a law that says you can't pay a known terrorist organization. So if you pay, make sure you talk to get legal counsel on this. It establishes a precedent that may increase the risk for future attack. Once they know they've been able to, you're a mark, you're probably going to get revisited by this. And then Bitcoin's difficult to get cash translated into Bitcoin and make that payment. Most people are not familiar with that process, so you need help with that. So if you don't want to pay the ransom, you have to deal with the consequences, which this is labor and time intensive. It may take weeks or months to get everything back up and running. If your data backup has been encrypted, you may not get your data back. You have to figure what the consequences of that. For a water district, it may be billing and customer information, employee data, SCADA data, very catastrophic. So this is a pretty serious adverse impact to the organization during an outage. Next slide. So you're paying a cyber criminal. What's that involved? So your organization makes a Bitcoin payment to the hackers, typically through an insurance or law firm. You don't do this yourself. You have to have a third party do it for you. The hackers will send you an encryption keys so you can unlock everything. Your staff or outsiders help you unlock all the encrypted software. And this is interesting. We found one of the big concerns came up is, well, we pay these people money. Are we going to ever hear from them yet? In our experience, it's 4 times now. We've always got the data back, and the cyber criminals were very helpful. They have better tech support than most of the big IT companies. In one case, the client had shut down powered off all their servers, which makes it very difficult to unencrypt because now the operating system is encrypted. The cyber criminals worked hand in glove with us to make sure everything got unencrypted. I mean, a week or so to do that. They didn't really have to do that, but they did. So their reputation's on the line, and they know that if they get the reputation for not helping people, people won't pay them. Then again, we did just pay them a large amount of money, so they are incentivized. Next slide. So the business impact, what does this mean to business owners, right? Well, this was a chemical plant. They made Schedule 3 pharmaceuticals, so that's opiates. The chemical plant relied on a SCADA system, which is common to a lot of water and irrigation districts, and that was all locked down and shut down. So the chemical plant was shut down. It's $1 million a day in lost revenue. Because it's a federally oversight industry, FBI and Department of Homeland Security got involved. Those two entities had different views on what should be done. There was a turf battle going on. FBI viewed it as a crime site, and they wanted to lock everything down and criminally prosecute. That's great, but you got a business to run. Homeland Security had a little more nuanced view and understood that we had to return to operation. But we had to resolve that conflict with the two of them, and that burned time. The parent organization got involved with the financial and legal risk. It was an overseas company, so now you have got representatives flying from overseas that are inserting themselves in the process, which slowed things down as well. And then the management staff were distracted from the business matters by the ransomware remediation effort. This took almost a month to get back up and running. And at the time, they're not processing any product and they're not focusing on anything else they probably should have been focusing on. Next slide. So return to operation, there's a little list of all the things we had to do. I'm not going to go through them all. But understand this was expensive. They only had a few IT people, so we had to augment that with several of our folks. And that's, you get people working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, around the clock, and they're highly skilled, talented folks. It's expensive. I don't know what the total, it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars just in labor to get this all up and running. And keep in mind, during this time, their systems are all down. They can't do any business. So they've got a big expense going out and no income coming in. Next slide. So root causes, how did we get here? What causes? This list, we do a lot of assessments for our clients, and this list looks very familiar to that of, that landscape. We see this a lot. These are common things. And I'll go over this quickly. They had a firewall, but it had a threat prevention service. It was a higher level function that was not enabled. They didn't purchase it. So it was not doing its job. They had an on-site backup. It was insufficient. It was never tested. It's also got encrypted. They had really no email threat prevention. Everything was obsolete and not been updated. Really an insufficient and weak antivirus strategy. Really no monitoring whatsoever. No network segmentation means they didn't keep the user network, the PC, separate from the business network, the servers. And no incident response or system documentation plan. So they were kind of a high value target. Made it pretty easy for the virus to do its job. Next slide. So additional impact to the business. Well, now you've got federal agencies involved, and they're not known for moving quickly. In this case, we had 2 agencies. Shareholders now are asking a lot of questions. Clients are asking a lot of questions. Revenue loss total in tens of millions, large capital expense to repair the damage, and there's staff impacts. lot of the staff got, but we lost an employee during this time period. He just got tired of working the time. I didn't sign up to work on 20-year-old technology. There was a lot of staff turnover at the client. Some willingly, some not willingly. We call them resume generating events. And for us, it was a challenge because a lot of the people we started work with weren't there at the end. And then also overall, there's just a trust in IT staff and management eroded. They really suffered a broken nose over this, and it probably continues to this day. Next slide. So here's some other lessons learned for us, what we took away from this, and hope to share from you. Again, it's to segment the core business and user network. They should be logically separated so that your users, your laptops, which is where most viruses and malware are going to come in, are separated from the business networks. Only use supported operating system. You know, Windows 7 went end of life a year ago, and Microsoft's not releasing any updates for that. But there's still vulnerabilities being discovered that aren't getting remediated. So use supported operating systems so vulnerabilities can be addressed. Update all your systems on a monthly basis. Use centralized logging. That means all the devices point their logs to a central spot that can be reviewed. A lot of times you can correlate events from a central point and see a firewall vulnerability and something happening over here. You know that something's going on. Enterprise grade endpoint protection. I did see a question about the best antivirus. I don't know if there is a best, but Gartner Research publishes a document rating all the endpoint protection suites. I think there's 4 in the leaders quadrant. Make sure it's one of those. Don't use one of the Russian ones. Some of our state clients were using Kaspersky, a Russian antivirus software company that shockingly was found out to be exfiltrating data overseas. So use one of the leaders. Use an offsite data backup. I know people are reluctant to having an offsite data backup or a cloud backup, but it's really the only way to protect your data. It's your get out of jail free card. If everything gets encrypted, if you have an offsite backup, it's still going to be impactful, but you can get your data back. If you have it on site, it's a high likelihood that the data will be encrypted and you'll never get the data back. Use next generation firewalls. These are the more intelligent firewalls that can actually look at traffic as it traverses the internet and inspect it. Eliminate the use of map drives. Map drives are with, you know, the share drive, the X drive, the M drive that people love. They're very convenient. Everyone can share a file up on the network. These are virus information superhighways. Viruses love map drives. They can propagate very easily across them. Deploy enterprise-grade monitoring tools so you know what's going on. And disable remote desktop to PCs and servers. If it's easy to get in remotely, it's easy for anyone to get in remotely. And then finally, the big takeaway is 2-factor authentication. That's the something you know, the password, and the something you have, like a text on your phone. You really reduce your exposure for someone hacking if you have 2-factor authentication. Not flawless, but it makes it much more difficult to do. People have to log in with 2 different factors for authentication. Next slide. More lessons learned. Develop a formal incident response policy. Who's going to do what when if something happens? It doesn't have to be ransomware. It could be, you know, a fire or anything that's going to affect your technology environment. Develop a formal IT acceptable use policy. Same thing. What are employees allowed to do on the internet or in IT in general? Are they allowed to have a password that's 1234? Are they allowed to visit risky websites? Update your internet filtering policy, same as well. Block risky websites. If there's no business reason to go to the website, why allow it? Provide annual training for all your employees, including executives. There's some really good solutions out there now that provide the training. A lot of the state clients we work with use a particular service from a company called Know Before that has all the training, but then they have modules that will actually send fake spear phishing emails, and then it reports back with who actually fell for it. David mentioned that people will fall for things 4 or 5 times, and that mirrors my experience as well. But it'll show over time that people will improve and learn to spot the spear phishing emails. It's a great service. It really gets great values. And understand that hackers are now criminals and state actors. They're not bored teens. These are professionals. So keep that in mind. Next slide. Also test everything. We believe in the Ronald Reagan's maxim, which trust but verify. So you have a data backup system. When was the last time that was restored? You tested it, make sure it works. Nobody does this. Usually when they do it is during a horrible situation, and often they find it wanting. So make sure you test your data backup. Antivirus, same thing. You can download a test antivirus or test virus. There's something called the ICAR, EICAR. It's just a test virus. It's not really a virus, but all the virus software manufacturers have agreed to treat it as an order. So your first test should be, if you can find it on the internet, that's your first fail. If you can find it, can you download it to your PC? That's your second fail. And if you can download it to your PC, can you copy it to a network server? Any one of those happens, you have a big hole in your antivirus strategy, and you should have a very difficult conversation with your IT folks. Monitoring. You don't want to be the first alert that something's going on is when everything's encrypted. You want to know that someone's attacking you. So deep monitoring really helps a lot. And security vulnerabilities. You can scan for the common vulnerabilities, or you can hire a company like David's company to scan and identify us beforehand, before the hackers have done it for you. And the user training, which I touched on a little earlier. Next slide. Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, Scott, we have a couple questions. So when an attack occurs and victim works with the attacker, are police contacted after restoration during the process, or never?
Can you repeat that question?
So when an attack occurs and victim works with attacker, are police contacted after restoration, during the process, or never?
Yeah, that's a legal question. You probably need to talk to You're not going to get, the cops aren't going to do anything about it. They just simply aren't. But I would talk to your legal counsel and ask them to.
Okay. Eliminate map drives. What do you recommend?
So map drives have been around forever. They're very convenient, but the better way is, and this is going to push people buttons, but the cloud tools like Microsoft Office 365, those are very difficult for viruses to actually move files around. OneDrive, things like that. The local map drives they're 25 years old. You have to remove that. So because it's an open channel at all times, just once the authentication is set up, it's a two-way highway. So you have to move to something where it's a one-way authenticated channel and not a bi-directional open channel. SharePoint, OneDrive, those are better tools for that.
All right, thank you. So let me introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is one of our own, Mark Madison. He's been a general manager of Florin Resource Conservation District, Elk Grove Water District since 2011, and is responsible for the overall management of the district. Mr. Madison has over 35 years of experience in the water wastewater industry. Prior to joining his current water district, he was the director of utilities for the city of Stockton, where he managed the city's utilities and oversaw the financing and construction of many high-profile projects. Let's welcome Mark. Mark?
Great, thank you, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I hope you appreciate where I'm coming from. Real quick, a little bit about our district. The Elk Grove Water District is a department of the Florin Resource Conservation District. We're a medium-sized water district providing retail water service to about 46,000 people. We've got about a $14 million budget and about 30 employees. So next slide, please. So why am I on this panel? I am certainly not a cybersecurity expert, but perhaps I'm very much like you. I don't know about you, but I don't even know how to program the remote controller for my television set. So I am very technically inept. I rely upon our IT specialists and my staff primarily to help and guide me in making good decisions on behalf of the district. What I can tell you is, though, our district and myself, I have learned a lot from a vulnerability assessment, some other incidents that we've had occur at our district. We did conduct a vulnerability assessment, and yet we still got hacked, and I'm going to tell you what occurred and what we think happened. And then lastly, I want to be able to offer some questions and some suggestions for all of you to consider going forward. Next slide. So our district, why did we become concerned? We became concerned because our IT systems were getting big and complicated. We have a lot of systems, from Office 365, document management systems, utility billing, payroll, computerized maintenance management systems, backflow prevention systems, SCADA, GIS, accounts payable, accounts receivable. Even though we're small, relatively small, we have a lot of IT stuff. We spend about $350,000 a year. on all of that IT stuff, and you probably have a pretty good cost yourself. I would also say our board chair, who happens to be on this Zoom call today, Tom Nelson, he is very technically savvy, and he actually pushed me for years to get out in front of cybersecurity. And I want to give him props for that, because he's really a smart guy, and he's largely the reason why we are where we are today. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. In February 2016, we really started to see some malicious attempts on our district. In February, in 1 month alone, we received 389,000 spam emails in 1 month. And then we also noticed an increase in the number of other malicious intrusion attempts. We had increased attempts against our firewall. It peaked in December of 2016 with 455,000 malicious sites blocked. And we also had malicious attachments blocked by our mail scanner. It was causing a lot of concern from our IT staff and so forth. It peaked in September with 659 attachments removed. So we were very successful, but we were getting slaughtered with attempts. And then lastly, I attended, along with some of my staff, a workshop just like this. And it was very interesting. We listened to an FBI agent who actually provided personal experiences when she had field experiences in both Nigeria and Ukraine. So it really piqued our attention. Next slide. And why should you be concerned? This is a war. You're in it. You may not think so. You may not want to be in it. But let me tell you, there's a lot of bad guys out there, and they want your money. And this is big business, as you've heard from Scott and David before. This is not small-time college hackers sitting in their dorm room. These are very orchestrated companies that they have their own HR departments. Scott got done telling you how they have customer service representatives standing by to help you pay your ransom. This is very, very big, very, very technical, and they get a lot of money. Every year, this year, it's expected to hit about $6 trillion worldwide. It's expected to reach $10.5 trillion by 2025. And I'm here to tell you that utilities like us, water departments, wastewater departments, they're now being preyed upon. There's more and more examples of public utilities getting hit. And obviously, like us, you provide an essential service. You can't go down. Scott talked about having to wait if you don't pay the ransom. That's the $64,000 question. Do you pay or not to pay? And if you don't pay, how long are you going to be held down? You provide drinking water to people, or at least we do. And then lastly, I'm going to tell you that if you're a general manager out there, or an IT department leader, and you haven't been proactive on top of this and you get nailed, your head's on the chopping block. And I don't know about you guys, but I like my job. Next slide. So what did we do? We decided to be proactive. Again, that was a big push by Chair Nelson, and to do something to hopefully better protect ourselves. And we felt that doing nothing is actually doing something, and we decided to actually do something. So what did we do? We hired an IT firm out of Fairfax, Virginia, to come in here and conduct a vulnerability assessment. We paid about $48,000 for that. I'm here to tell you that in my strong opinion, you need to do this. You can't afford not to do it. I know you may be small, the budgets are tight, but the cost that you can get nailed with will far exceed this. In our case, we included a number of items, basic items in their scope, a review of the IT systems, of course, the structures. We wanted them to review our transaction processes, including the relationships that we had with our bank, like Farmers and Merchants Bank, and our billing software. They looked at how we integrated with our accounts receivable and accounts payable software. We wanted to find out how we were protecting our customers' money. Obviously, we had penetration testing performed. We called for that. I can tell you right now, you can hear what David will do. That was absolutely scary to think what David has the ability to do. We wanted it done from the outside as well as the inside. We wanted to try to have them hack through our Wi-Fi systems and to try to steal administration credentials, etc. We obviously wanted to have them check our supervisory control and data acquisition systems, our SCADA systems. And then we wanted them to train our staff because, as I'll tell you in a little bit, people are your weakest link. Next slide. So as we got started, here were some of my initial observations and thoughts as the general manager and the leader of our district. So first of all, a vulnerability assessment is going to show you your warts and your flaws, but that is exactly what you want. You want to find your weak points. And I will tell you that your IT staff and your consultants, the people that work on these things, they're going to be worried. They think you might be looking over their shoulder. Their work is going to get exposed. So you need to hold their hand. You need to help them understand that a vulnerability assessment actually will help them and help your district, and we all want to succeed. Another problem is that sometimes board members don't want to spend the money. Now, I will tell you that in my case here, I had strong support top to bottom from my board. Do not misread me on this. It's not like I had a fist fight going on at all. They were very willing to spend the money to look under our hood, and that's exactly what we did. But it can be a problem, especially in smaller districts where money is really, really tight. And you as a general manager, you need to impress that this is really important. This is just important as water quality, safety, your personnel needs, and financial management, because it does affect your financial management. And then lastly, at least at that time, this was a couple of years ago, we had a hard time finding a good vulnerability assessment consultant. So David and Scott and others, if you have, they don't have to be local. We used one out of Virginia, but we're going to be gearing up to do a refresh on our VA. And I would like to have some of you tell me ideas on who you might recommend. You could do that offline at the end. I'm going to give you my email address. And if you could give me some thoughts on who has worked well for you, I'd like to hear from you on that. Next slide. So the firm that came in from Virginia, what did they find? So this was kind of embarrassing. They hacked us in 15 minutes. They got in through our copy machine. They plugged right into the copy machine. They used the default password that comes with your copy machine, and they wormed all over the place. They were able to steal our administration credentials. They got everywhere through our network. They found another default setting in Windows. He was able to exploit that. It allowed this gentleman named Rehan to do anything he wanted to do. He could go anywhere he wanted to go. So as much as we thought we were airtight, not so much. They cracked us in a hurry. Lastly, you should also know that when you do a vulnerability assessment, that report is confidential. It is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. And so we keep our VA report in our safe, actually. Next slide, please. So what did we do about it? We called it our secret sauce. We had 18 recommended improvements. We implemented 17 of the 18. The number 18 was just hardening some of our offsite facilities, which we felt were pretty strong as they were. But we, very importantly, as Scott recommended, we implemented KnowBe4. And this is called security awareness training. And if there's one thing that you take away from this session here, this workshop, you should implement security awareness training like KnowBe4. It's one of the best things that we have done. And what that does is it allows, it continuously tests your staff. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We implemented what's called segmentation. That's like installing firewalls between departments. It's like baffles in a ship. It prevents that bad guy from being able to worm around to all other departments and sectors where they can get into big time mischief and get things that you don't want them to have. We also implemented a program to update our hardware every 5 years. So we budget for that. We strengthened our SCADA system firewall. We implemented monthly third-party vulnerability scanning. And frankly, the rest I'm not going to share with you because it is confidential information. Next slide. So we did all that, and we still got hacked, believe it or not. We thought we had it buttoned up nice and tight, and they got us. One of our employees, won't mention any names, they took the bait. It was a classic case of what's called CEO fraud. An email came in from someone imitating one of our employees. And you know, these crooks, these bad guys they're smart, and they're going to watch you. They will look at your website. They will follow you and track you. And especially if they can get your email address on the website, they will send you an email, and you think it's coming from your friend or your fellow employee, and it's not. It's imitated. And that's what happened to us. We had an email that came into one of our employees imitating one of our other employees, and that email requested that we change his direct deposit to another account. We failed to check with that employee or the bank, and we learned about it when the employee came forth and said, "Hey, where's my money? I need my paycheck." And by that time, it was about 4 days later. The account was already closed. Fortunately, we only lost about $1,800. Not a huge dent, more of an embarrassment to tell you the truth. But these types of things can yield some tremendous harm, especially when you get into requests to wire money. I want to emphasize how important it is that if you receive a request to wire money, or if you're involved in some sort of a transaction, purchase of real estate or whatnot, you need to confirm the source by calling them. I don't recommend emailing them. I recommend that you call them and you know exactly who you're talking to. You confirm the payment information, the account, routing number, and the payment itself. You need to be careful with wire transfers. Next slide. So, as you've heard before, there's a lot of people out there getting hit. We're not the only ones. This is just some examples of, you know, what we've seen in our neighborhood here. I can tell you that there was one other district. I won't tell you who it was, but I did talk to their general manager and know him very, very well. And he just said his life was hell for about 3 weeks. They got locked up, and they were really trying to work things out. And he said that the Joint Powers Insurance Authority came in and saved them. I'm going to talk about what JPIA will do for you here in a little bit, but he was exceedingly complimentary about the JPIA team that helped bail them out, and they ended up paying just a fraction of the ransom amount. I don't have the exact numbers, but it was like a lot less. And then here's some other examples of just some other entities that I scrounged up. Take note that in Texas, 22 local governments were hit in a single attack in 2019. So that was obviously very well orchestrated. So what did I learn from it? What did we learn from it? Next slide, please. Thank you. So you're right, David or Scott. You know, security is inherently inconvenient, and vigilance is the price of liberty. Humans are your weakest link. You have to teach them to not click. They need to stop, look, and think. Implement know before or something like that, because know before will often send out, you know, test emails trying to bait the employees to click, and they're going to fail. They will click. We see failures about, I don't know, 5 or 6 a month here in our district. And when they fail, you know, they get put on the naughty list, and they have to go back to training, and employees get tired of that. So, you know, inch by inch, gradually, it incentivizes them to be a little more diligent or vigilant on what they're doing with their emails. And then, as was previously mentioned, some agencies will also access, limit access to the internet, which is a good idea. And then also, like I said before, don't use default passwords. It's not only on copy machines. There are other, you know, items that you have that come with default passwords. So be aware of what has default passwords and change them. Don't just use ABC123 or admin or something like that. And then probably most important, if you're a general manager out there on this call, don't try to be the pro. You're probably not. If you're like me, you're a very bad IT person. And so I've learned to get help. Next slide. So the quote up above, that a wise man learns by another's mistakes and a fool by his own, that's actually my father. I say it quite often. What do you do if you get hacked? As previously mentioned, don't wait. You need to act very fast. Time can cost you a lot of money, and don't act on your own. If you don't have an IT department, you need to call JPIA immediately, by the way. And specifically, you need to get a hold of Karen Thiesing, Andy Sells, or Jennifer Nagasek. They will help you straight away. And if you have an IT department, get their help too, obviously. But if you don't have an IT department, get with JPIA. JPIA will assemble a team of experts led by Breesley Beach Solution. It's easy with Breesley, is what I've said. And they bring in a host of additional players depending on the nature of the incident. They will use people like Baker, Hostetler, Kivu, and Kura, Coveware, Mox 5 to name a few. And again, Karen, Andy, or Jennifer can walk you all through that. But the good news is if you get into trouble, you have help.
Hey, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mark, just one thing I'd like to add. That's for those that participate in our liability program. That's where this coverage applies. So,
okay.
Thank you.
That's fair. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about customer notifications. You work for the public, at least I do. And sometimes it's painful to deal with what you have to do. And that is if you have a breach of your customer's data, specifically their personal unencrypted information, you need to inform them of that. You cannot hold on to that problem. And you need to notify your customers in writing in the most expedient time possible. That's specified in the California Civil Code sections, specified there. You can look it up. And if you have over 500 California residents that have been affected by this breach, you also have to notify the Attorney General. Now, the notifications may be delayed if a law enforcement agency deems that the notification will impede a criminal investigation. You know, obviously everything's going to be specific to what's happening with you, but I do want to encourage you to think about how you would feel as a customer if your private information was breached. I think you, like myself, would want to know. And then lastly, as a general manager or a board member, if you don't do that, you're going to look really, really bad, especially in the press. Next slide. A couple of other thoughts and suggestions. There is a center called the Water and Wastewater Utilities, or the Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It's abbreviated as the Water ISAC. And I would encourage you to go there. I would encourage you to become a member. They have a plethora of tools and resources, not only related to cybersecurity, but other things too. And they also provide threat notices, briefings, bulletins, and alerts, so that if there's a patch, and an example that I have is that in August, Microsoft issued a disclosure that there was a patch needed to shore up a hole in Windows due to a vulnerability in the code. That threat brought with it the highest level of threat level that there is. Department of Homeland Security issued an emergency order, Emergency Directive 20-04 on September 18th, and alerting everybody to the problem and making sure that everybody gets that patch. You all should have that patch, otherwise you are still at risk. This ranked as a 10 out of 10 in terms of DHS's threat level. In general, I think that general managers and board members, you need to take cybersecurity seriously as we have done. I'm not saying we're perfect, but we do think this is a very serious matter. It's getting more serious, and I don't think you should make cybersecurity an afterthought. One more page, next page thing. I do encourage you, strongly recommend that you, if you have not done so already, you, like us, do complete a vulnerability assessment and then do what they recommend. Don't ignore it. You got to keep your operating systems and software patched and up to date. Otherwise, they won't maintain it and you'll be exposed. And then from a management standpoint, you have to build significant IT funding into your budgets. You have to incorporate cybersecurity into your emergency response plans. We're updating our emergency response plan this year. It'll be part of it. And then again, if you get hacked, act quickly and get help, either through JPIA or your IT department, and then notify your customers in accordance with the law. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. Here's my contact information. Again, if you have anything you need, just let me know. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, David. We do have a couple questions. I don't have a lot of time for questions because I'd like to give Karen a couple minutes to let us know what's covered. Certainly all of you probably like to know what's covered. First off, a question about this session be available. It is being recorded. We will make it available on our website for viewing. And so you'll be able to view it there. Couple other things here. I'm just looking at questions. Any recommendations? This is for Mark, Scott, or David. Any recommendations on antivirus software?
I can tell you the endpoint protection tool that causes us, the hackers, the most frustration in our work is a little known tool called SentinelOne. It is the most frustrating tool we run up against. That said, most antivirus software packages work well if they're properly configured. Many of them are not properly configured.
All right, Scott, any Scott, David? Yeah.
Yeah, we always recommend whatever the Gartner Leaders Quadrant. So I think that's right now it's Trend Micro, Microsoft's the Defender, but with the ATP, which is the enterprise version, not the one that comes with Windows. There's a couple other ones that I'll actually send a copy of the Gartner report for endpoint protection. And if you want to distribute the members, you can do that. Gartner looks at not just the technical, but also what's this whole support ecosphere on that. So whether their technical support, their financial viability, and all that.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick note, Jennifer's mentioned, and if you're a member of our liability program, Jennifer Nagosic, who's our property and liability claims manager, mentioned if you do have a claim to contact us right away. Don't waste any time. Thought I put some emphasis there. So thank you, Jennifer. So at this time, I know there's some other questions, but I'd like to give Karen just a couple minutes to recap what the coverage is in the liability program for cybersecurity. So I'd like to introduce to you Karen Thiesing. Karen Thiesing is our Director of Member Services. She is the one responsible in our organization for securing this coverage for us, and she's going to give us a rundown of what's covered. So Karen?
Yes, thank you, David. Hello, everyone, and good morning. I'm Karen Thiesing, Director of Insurance Services, and one of my responsibilities at the JPIA is to procure the insurances that we provide our members, whether it's general liability, property, and certainly cyber. So one clarification, though, this coverage is available to the liability and property members. We molded it, both of them together over the last couple of years. So if you are in one or both, you have this coverage. Only those members that are only in the workers' comp program, they do not. So gives you a good a reason to look at our other programs. So before I get into the coverage, I want to share what we've experienced just since July of 2020. Again, just since July. We've had 3 claims in that period of time. One claim ended up in, we've expended $18,000 and change. Another claim was one district. We made 2 payments. One was $113,000 and change, and the other payment was $412,000 and change. So this is real. This is not an emerging risk. It has been out there, and the public sector is seeing more activity in this last year than they have. And I won't recap why, but everything that you've learned today about creating a better IT system, training, can't emphasize that enough. So as this is so pertinent, we have a meeting next week to talk about our July 1 renewal, and cyber is a part of that conversation. And like the other coverages that we have seen a tough market to acquire coverage, and pricing has been expensive, we have now been told that that's what's going to be seen in the cyber realm as well. So it's not going to be as inexpensive as it has in the past. And so for you to do your part with all these risk management mitigation techniques will help us buy a product that is vast and less expensive. So please do your part. Robin, can we move on to the next screen? And I see we've got a typo already. This was in place for 2021. So this is the coverage that is currently in place. We've got a couple different aspects of coverage. We have first party coverage, and what that means is it will protect you for any loss of your data. And it will also protect your business interruption from unauthorized access, which may affect your computer and or your data. And then there's coverage to protect the damage to your computer from a hack. And the other type of coverage is what we call third-party coverage. It's the liability that ensues because you've lost employees or your customers' data. There is a liability component to cyber risk, as well as liability for information that may be posted on your website that is manipulated by a hacker. We also protect you from governmental fines for not complying with the regulations and any credit card fines as a result of non-compliance. We have many of our districts who allow credit card payments from their constituents. And we've got some other coverages that are part of your program. The cost to let people know they've lost their data, cost to have help understanding the most recent data laws that are in effect. We've talked about different civil codes and federal codes. There's help for that. There is cost to help navigating messaging to put forward. So you may have to have a communication specialist to speak to your constituents about a data loss. And certainly there's coverage for money lost due to a fraudulent email scam. So that gives you an overall flavor of the program. You do see on the screen that it's a 5 million limit per occurrence per aggregate. And so what does the heck does that mean? Our policy is with Beasley, as Mark pointed out, and we've been able to gently up our limits since 2017 when this first was a product available to you. It's now 5 million per occurrence. So as I talked about some of the claims we've had, if one member has a claim, you have up to 5 million for particular issues that may be a part of that claim, but there's also an aggregate. So the most this policy, let me actually emphasize, this is an insurance policy. We are not risk sharing cyber exposure. And we're not because of the severity of the pandemic almost, and it's an epidemic. And we can't actually get our arms around it to self-fund for this. So we actually bought an insurance policy. So that insurance policy will only pay 5 million for ever how many claims we may have in a fiscal year. So we continually try to tweak that and work those numbers, and I'll be able to tell you more what next year will look like after my meeting next week. So one thing I do want to leave you with, you have a whole host of tools for you to fight this battle with the bad guys. So if you email me your email address, your name, and your title, I then submit that to Beasley, and Beasley gives you a specific code so you can unlock all sorts of tools that they provide us. And a part of the tools is also deep discounts for tests, like the penetration test or the vulnerability test, as well as some of the other tools that they have. So again, it's a fantastic program, and it will save you money not only from a loss, but the tools and services that you should be implementing. So with that, David gave me 5 minutes. I'm probably already over, so feel free to reach out to me if you have individual questions. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating today.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate it. And I thank you again to David, Scott, Mark, for your presentation and your time. And I apologize, everybody. I know there's some other questions out there. Maybe we need to do another session on this with some more information. But I really appreciate everybody attending. And,
David, I'm sorry, before more folks start logging off, there were questions for handouts. If Scott and Mark could PDF their PowerPoints and send it over to us if they'd like, and then we can distribute it with David T's handout.
Happy to do that.
Thank you.
It's fine, no problem.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Robin. So just one last thing I'd ask everybody before you log out. We would like your feedback on this session. So keep your eyes out. We'll have an email sent out for feedback on the session, something that we could share with the speaker so they have feedback, but also for our organization, make sure, did we hit the mark in this session? Are there other things you'd like to see? These are the things that we'd like to know. And so that feedback will be important to us. So please keep your eyes out. It will go to the email that you registered with. That's what we would use to send out the questionnaire for feedback. So again, appreciate all your time and thank you for all attending.
Thank you.
Great
everyone.
job,
That was an
David, and
amazing
everybody.
session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Able to see the slides.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
David, Scott.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for sending information.
Oh, bye-bye.
Funny, my internet connection died right in the middle of the presentation, so I had to go back to my phone.
Oh,
It's on
sorry.
cybersecurity. Funny. And I still haven't been able to get it to come back.
Oh, sorry. If David T, Scott, and Mark are still on the line, very positive feedbacks in the chat. If you guys want to scroll through, very, very positive. Nice job.
All right, hey, thanks. Thanks again, everybody. Robin, great job. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Robin, are you there?
Yes.
This is Jack. It was great. I'm going to have Stephanie Dalton send some stuff to you guys and make a request for those slides for our general manager.
Perfect.
And Mark, it was great having lunch with you whenever we did. Hopefully I'll see you again soon if you're still there. If not, thank you. This was very informative.
Very much. Thank you for participating in your feedback. Appreciate it.
All righty. Be safe.
You too. Happy holidays. David, you're still there? Let's see.
Hi, Robin.
Hello.
Hi, I'm sorry, I was talking with someone else. Is there a chance I could get Karen's email address? I wanted to